morning, students. Welcome to the fifth presentation for LSK3701 Life Skills, Science and Technology Teaching in the Foundation Phase. So I'm your lecturer, Mrs. A. Carrim, and you can email me on ecarrier1@unisa.ac.za. So what we're looking at today is Learning Unit 4, which forms part of Section B. Okay, so the purpose of this introduction is to briefly introduce you, to basically become familiar with the content as well as, understanding how Section B, which is technology education for young learners, follows Section A, and which basically dealt with how teaching and learning of science happen in the foundation phase. So once you have reflected on the notes on technology education in Section B, the difference and the relationship between science and technology should be clear to you. As you read and think about the nature of technology, you should be able to refer back, to the nature of science. And the simplest way of differentiating between science and technology is by understanding what the purpose of a specific activity is, and easy to understand the nature of the world, whether it's natural and man-made, or is it to develop or improve the world by designing or redesigning aspects of the world. So this is just basically the content that you will be going through in Learning Unit 4. Please ensure that you go through each section thoroughly so that you're able to apply your knowledge. Okay, so now we're looking at Learning Unit 4, which is the problem-solving nature of technology education. And on completion of this learning unit, you should be able to analyze and evaluate problem-based scenarios as a basis for planning appropriate solutions. You need to be able to apply appropriate problem-solving strategies, to examples given, and also plan and write paragraphs, to communicate ideas and opinions about technological literacy, using appropriate academic and professional discourse. You also need to be able to analyze, interpret, and make comparisons, of the different teaching approaches, such as technology problem solving, integration of mathematics, language, and creativity, and a cultural historical perspective. You also need to be able to identify suitable context for the application of these approaches, and also identify, the strengths and limitations of each approach, and suggest ways, in which the approaches can be used successfully in the foundation phase classroom. You also need to use examples, to cite the use of an approach appropriate for the learning context. So please ensure that you're able to apply the content to any different context or theme. And in this way, you're able to apply the content in any topic. Okay, so we're looking at technology education in the South African curriculum. So remember, the current curriculum policy documents, that is both the National Curriculum Statement, the NCS, and the Curriculum and Assessment Policy Statement, the CAPS, outline the aims of the South African education, at schooling levels. So the aim of teaching and learning is to produce learners who are able to use critical and creative thinking to identify and solve problems, to make decisions, and basically work effectively as individuals and with others as members of a team. They also need to organize and manage themselves and their activities responsibly and effectively. So there's a lot of information that you need to go through in the study guide. And the unit also focuses on how the aims can be achieved, when technology lessons are taught to foundation phase children. And also in the foundation phase, remember, teachers are required to teach the technological processes and skills described in the learning outcome 1 only. And the outcome also states, that learners will be able to apply technological processes and skills ethically and responsibly, using appropriate information and communication technologies. So it's important that you understand what technology education is, what technology is, what technological literacy is, what is indigenous knowledge. And when you look at technology education in the South African curriculum, you need to understand the relationship between the design process and the information technology, in the technology education curriculum of South Africa, which is very important. When you're looking at technology, remember, literature on the meaning of technology is very extensive, since we want to focus on a particular meaning. We will look at the definition of technology as given by the NCS, where we will use this definition to clarify how technology should be taught and assessed. looking at the use of knowledge, skills, and resources to meet people's needs and wants by developing practical solutions to problems, taking social and environmental factors into consideration. And then also when you're looking at technological literacy, you're looking at the NCS, states that the purpose of technology education is to contribute towards learners' technological literacy by giving them opportunities, for learning that allow them to develop and apply, specific skills that allow them to solve technological problems, and also develop an understanding of concepts and knowledge used in technology, and also be able to use the knowledge responsibly and purposefully. So developing that in appreciation, for the interaction between people's values and attitudes, and technology, society, and environment is very important. So if you read about this in the study guide, you will get a good understanding of what technological literacy is as well. When you're looking at Indigenous knowledge, there is a section where you'll have to go through, Indigenous knowledge in that sense, where it gives you a better understanding. But remember, it's also a creative way of solving a modern problem, So it's relevant for technology education because throughout all ages, humankind has been faced with problems with regard, to food, shelter, health, keeping warm or cool, and so forth. So these problems are solved by developing solutions from the resources that are available in a particular area, be it through experience or whatever the case may be. I think I didn't touch on technology education as per se, but that's also in your study guide, where you need to consider the aim of teaching and learning, what is it aimed to produce learners, using that critical and creative thinking, organizing and managing themselves, and collecting, analyzing, and organizing and critically evaluating information, as well as, using science and technology effectively, showing responsibility towards the environment and the health of others, also demonstrating an understanding of the world. So it's also a lot of things that you need to take into consideration, in terms of the South African technology education curriculum, which requires our learners to be given the opportunity to learn the processes and skills involved in using information and communication technology. It's going to be described more in Learning Unit 5, but the relationship between the design process and information technology in the South African curriculum is very important to understand, as you see on this slide here. Okay, so now we're looking at questions that you can ask yourself when going through the information, in the study guide with reference to technology education in the South African curriculum. Make sure that you know the two current curriculum policy documents. What do these current policy documents outline? What are the 7 aims of teaching and learning in terms of the type of learners that should be produced? What are the 3 learning outcomes for technology education, that's described by the National Curriculum Statement, and also in the foundation phase? Ask yourself, teachers are required to teach the technological process skills described in learning outcome 1 only. What does this outcome state? And also you need to understand what do learners engage in during technological activities. I notice a lot of students fail to understand the info, that it's problem solving as well, and they only think of computers and all of those type of technology activities. What is the process that these skills use together, known as? And you also need to show the relationship, between the design process and the information technology in the technology education curriculum of South Africa, as noted in the previous slide. You need to be able to define technology. What does technology find solutions to? How does technology integrate with technological literacy? It's very important things that you need to consider when going through this learning unit. Okay, so now we're looking at technological literacy. These are also just questions created for you to answer while going through the study guide. What is the purpose of technology education according to the NCS? It's basically to contribute towards learners' technological literacy by giving them opportunities for learning that allow them to, I think I mentioned this in the previous slide as well, but there is a lot of information in the study guide that can give you a better understanding. So if you read, the section in the CAPS curriculum document, the study area is called beginning knowledge, which is described as the drawing together of content and concepts from social sciences, in terms of history and geography, the natural sciences and technology. So the social science concepts, in relation to beginning knowledge are conservation, cause and effect, place, adaptation, relationships and independence. I'm sure now you remembering things that we spoke about in the presentations based on section A. Now we link these social science concepts to the so-called, big ideas, big concepts of science. So you should review those relevant sections, to get a clearer understanding of what big ideas are, and how you can relate it to your technology learning as well. So remember, this means now when you're looking at the diagram here on the presentation, you'll notice that it says a learning outcome 1 from NCS, technology education, plus the concepts of social studies, beginning knowledge from the CAPS, life skills for foundation phase, outcomes 2 and 3 of NCS is equals to the technology education activities for foundation phase with a focus on the design process. So it's very important that you understand the design process in the technology section. It basically means that the South African curriculum requires teachers to develop technological literacy in our young learners, by developing learning activities that require learners to use the design process and the design process skills. If we give them opportunity to learn about technological products and systems and how they affect the environment and society, we develop attitudes and values about the wise and ethical use of technology. So remember, technological literacy, includes the ability to use technological products and systems responsibly and wisely, or simply with good attitudes and values. So let's think about a social problem. Let's look at our violent society. There are many children that live in areas where gang violence is rife, and children are killed in the crossfire, and their family members may even be gang members. So guns are found in the homes not only of gang members, but ordinary people, who are trying to stay safe. So when we look at the concept of guns, guns are technological products. They're designed to defend and kill. They are made with the use of tools. We can definitely say they are technological products. So when we're thinking about violence in schools, it's a major issue, and young learners in many parts of our country are subjected, to all types of violence, not just gun violence. How you react will depend on your own attitude to guns and violence. So the social problem of violence has basically invaded our schools. There's a case now where a principal was actually shot. So we do not intend to give you answers to these problems, only to challenge our learners to think about, their attitude to violence and the safety and well-being of not only the learners and the teachers and parents you teach, but you basically the attitude to violence and guns will be reflected in the kinds of drawings you allow learners to draw, the kinds of toys you allow them to bring to class, or the toys that learners can play with, in terms of the fantasy area of your classroom. Let's look at it in the foundation phase level. Having reflected on a society where violence is pervasive, should you allow toy guns and toy knives in your class? These are things that you need to consider. And, this is where we are forming the attitudes and the values of students within our foundation phase classroom. So as we have seen, for people to be technologically literate, they must have, be able to make certain decisions about their use of technology and technological devices. We have looked at one example of technological product, guns. I don't know if it made sense to you, but moreover, the access to the internet and social media that our children are currently, on, has a very big risk, and people should therefore be able to use technology with wisdom. Technology education is a problem-solving activity, and teachers have to develop the activities that allow learners to find solutions to problems, and by using this process called the design process. Okay, so let's look at the problem-solving nature of technology. This is also questions for you to ask yourself while going through the learning unit so that you don't miss important information. What is at the heart of the design process? Remember, the heart of the design process is basically to identify everyday problems, needs and wants of people. And it's important that we have practical solutions that students can develop through the problem solving process. And the problem solving basically is a mental process that involves discovering, analyzing, and solving issues. And the ultimate goal is basically to overcome obstacles, and to find a solution that best suits the problem, and thereby allowing them to resolve it in some way. And they obviously looking for the best strategy for solving the problem. And everyone has a unique take to a situation, and we need to incorporate things like good problem solvers have in terms of the habits of mind that we discuss in learning unit 2. So in order for them to solve problems correctly, it is important that we follow a series of steps. So you need to look at the steps to solve a problem, in terms of identify the problem, develop alternatives, select the best alternative, implement, decide if the solution work. But this is basically a simplified version of the problem solving process. You need to go through this unit well in order to notice that the design process has, expanded steps, and it has steps in the design process explained as the steps in the problem solving process, which is important for you to also note so that you use the correct, steps within your assignment and exam. So now, if looking at questions like what does the South African curriculum require learners to develop, remember the main aim is to develop skills necessary to perform two processes during the technology education. And one of these, processes in the design process, the NCS describes the design process as a creative, an interactive tool used to develop solutions identified, to identify problems or human needs. And the skills associated with the design process are as follows. They need to investigate, design, um, make, evaluate, and communicate. So this is important that you understand these 5 steps: investigate, design, make, evaluate, communicate, because the problem solving process is, explained within the design process. And these are the steps: investigate, design, make, evaluate, communicate. When you're looking at the expanded design steps of the design process, it's basically ask, identify the needs and constraints, research the problem, imagine, by developing possible solutions. Plan is selecting a promising solution, create, building a prototype, test and evaluate prototype, and improve, redesign as needed. So you're going to go through these steps, and you're going to have to understand, the section that is very detailed in table 4.1. It basically goes through each step, the investigate, the design, the make, the evaluate, communicate in such detail that also gives you not only the problem solving steps, but it gives you an explanation of the problem solving steps as well as explanation of the design process step. So in that way, you're able to incorporate the two, and apply it well to different topics that can come up in your assessment as well as your exam. So when you're identifying a problem, remember, while it may seem like an obvious step, identifying a problem is not always simple. One must be very clear about what the problem is. And when you're looking at it from a design process steps, you need to be able to research and find information, and gather data and information to grasp, this step. When you're looking at the design process, this step is basically to solve the problem. The approach will basically depend on the context, the situation, and obviously an individual's unique preference. So once a problem is fully understood, the design brief needs to be written, and a possible solution should be generated at this point. These ideas are drawn on paper, and the first idea may not necessarily be the best. So when you're looking at that you have to choose a solution and things like that. When you make, once a course of action has been decided on, it must be implemented and the progress needs to be monitored. This step also provides opportunities for learners to use different tools, equipment, materials, to develop a solution to the identified problem. And it also involves maybe building, testing, modifying the product that is made. And the making stage should also take place according to the design, and it should be acceptable if certain modifications are made during that stage. Evaluating after a solution has been reached, it is important to evaluate the results. You want to see learners have to evaluate, whether the actions, decisions, and results throughout the design process has been followed, and you arrived at and this is where changes or improvements can be suggested. And in terms of communicating, the assessment evidence of the processes followed, can be presented, whether it be oral, written, electronic form. So this is also an important part of the steps. Okay, so far we know that the design process, which is the problem solving process in this case, is basically coming up with new ideas, and it needs to be a creative process. So let's look at the next slide, which is creativity and the design process. So these are also questions that you need to, make sure that you consider when going through this section. So what does the design process encourage? Remember, critical and creative thinking is very important. And it's also asking, do you think creative thinking is important in technology education? So if you look at creativity, is basically a thinking process, that allows for expression of new ideas. And creativity is the act of turning new and imaginative ideas into reality. So it's very important that we get our young learners to, to use the creative thinking that allows, and it also allows learning to take place at the same time. So you give them that free exploration time, where learners will think about how changing something on their design will lead to a certain result. And it's basically a very good way to teach our students. And learners in different grades, remember, have different abilities to express their ideas in the form of art, or whatever it is. But it's important that you consider, the level of issues that you bring up, because obviously we're looking at the foundation phase level. So think about what creativity is, be able to describe creativity, be able to understand what creativity is characterized as, the two processes that creativity involve, and what do art do for learners. You need to think of all of these things. What is creative thinking based on? How does causal reasoning take place during creative thinking? And what type of learners are the South Africa's curriculum aimed at developing? We're also looking at, why do teachers develop visual literacy, in our learners. So there is a saying that a picture can paint 1,000 words. So remember, when we're looking at why learners can describe their ideas, in drawings, creative thinking, and cause and effect thinking, how that happens. We need to make sure that that we become aware of the thinking involved in art, and we need to ask our learners to explain their artworks. Sometimes learners have so much ideas, and maybe we don't understand their drawing. So learner would have thought about the world, and learners usually paint pictures or draw pictures to their own understanding. And it's important that we gain understanding of what their ideas, and inspire them to use these vision and ideas constructively. Okay, looking at Indigenous knowledge and technological problem solving, I know that we touched on this in the beginning of this presentation, but you need to go through this in detail and be able to understand what Indigenous knowledge is, what type of knowledge needs to be considered as creative way to solve a modern problem, define Indigenous knowledge, define technology at the same time, explain why Indigenous knowledge is relevant for technology education, and you also need to describe the characteristic of Indigenous knowledge. And all these need to be applied to your different questions that you can receive. So remember, throughout all ages, like we said, humankind has faced, many problems, whether it be food, shelter, health, keeping warm or cool, and so forth. So these problems are solved by developing solutions from resources are available in a particular area. So these solutions become part of the indigenous knowledge of people living in that area. Remember, it's based on experience. It's been tested over centuries. There's a collective data base of observable knowledge. It's also adapted to local cultures and, your environments. But it can be dynamic and changing, and it's also application of problem solving. It can be told to students through storytelling, and also just like basic social order, ceremonies, the spirituality. And it also bridges the science of theory, with the science of practice. And it can be contextualized, ecologically based approach. So these are all things that you need to understand so that you can actually incorporate it into your teaching as well. Now we're looking at the content area of technology education. There are three learning strands for technology education in the South African curriculum, and these strands are technological processes, systems and control, and structures. So you need to go to these content areas. These content areas will not be taught as such. Rather, this module is just basically showing you, to find information about topics for yourself and your learners, and Learning Unit 5 presents descriptions, of how information technology is used for information processing. So it is more important that learners develop, the design skills, the creativity, and teamwork than learn facts about processing systems and structure. But we basically propose that technology be taught using a teaching framework similar to the one proposed, for science, that organizes big ideas, habits of mind and body, through the content of topics of the curriculum on beginning knowledge. So the difference between science lessons and technology lessons is that science is taught through inquiry, and technology is taught through the design process. So remember to go through this section. It's also equally important. We're looking at language and technology education. Remember, we need to understand what happens when language is integrated into technology education, and be able to describe how science activities can incorporate language, using relevant examples, by explaining using, examples on how language can be used during the design process activities. Remember, during integrating language is basically referring to, Learning Unit 1, where the focus was on conceptual change theory. So learners have the opportunity to use scientific words too. Learners can use language during discussions in their groups of what the problem is and how a problem can be solved. They also explain their drawings, and while building and evaluating their models. So remember, language is something that is important in most activities, whether it be science, technology, looking at mathematics and technology education. Mathematical concepts basically relate to space and shape and measurement, and this is also developed in the design process. So the concept of space, of basically the foundation phase, learners start to measure informal units, but until then they use informal units. So whether you're doing a simple activity, basing on the design process, you will have things that require measuring, considering space, things like that. So it's important that you be able to describe how mathematical concepts, in terms of space, shape, and measurement can be developed in the design process as well. Okay, so this brings me to the end of this presentation. I know that there's quite a bit of content to go through in this learning unit as well, and be able to, in order for you to, be successful in understanding this learning unit, you will have to understand that you were introduced to the theoretical underpinnings of technology education, within the South African curriculum. And remember that the steps of the design process are very important to follow, and that's when you can, basically apply the content to different themes or contexts or identified problems. We noticed that students fail to use the design process steps, and that's where they lose marks, because if it's not followed systematically and, showing and understanding at each step, you may not get the marks that, that you expect, even though you applied content to different themes. So remember to develop that creative thinking in our learners. And and it's also very important, that language and mathematics are integrated in the context of a problem. So all the best going through Learning Unit 4. I'll see you in the next presentation for Learning Unit 5. Bye, students.